interesting. My sound has disappeared. Let's
Oh no,
see.
I can hear you.
Oop, there it goes. Now it's working again. All right.
Awesome.
Okay. A little bit of a rocky start because I am doing this from home for the first time. So I was desperately trying to get everything to stop.
No, that's so real. That's so real.
It's like everything's password protected like 4 times over now, and I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Now my computer is opening programs I don't want. There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay. So it has been a minute since we last spoke.
Yeah.
How have things been?
They've been good. Oh my gosh. Sold two more books, went on tour, got to announce the movie, things have been
God, in the madness of my own work schedule, I'd almost forgotten that had happened as well. That's incredible.
Don't worry, I
Congratulations.
keep forgetting as well. Every
That
now and
is
then I will like scroll across it on my own feed and be like, oh my gosh, jump scare.
your own life, yeah. Oh my goodness. Congratulations. I cannot imagine that is huge.
It has been wild. The thing that's keeping me humble is that at my day job, nobody knows who I am and my name means nothing. It's great. I love the reality check.
There you go. For the viewers, no one live at the moment, but in the future, I believe it was Hell Followed With Us that was bought for a book
Yes.
deal or for the movie deal. Correct. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I was like, I just want to make sure that information was correct. That is, first of all, that book was incredible. And I am so thrilled to see what they'll do with it on the big screen. That is amazing. So,
We've got some really cool things in the works. I'm really excited that we're working with like Powerhouse Animation Studios. They made Castlevania.
oh,
And there were so many jokes early on, of me being like, oh, I wouldn't be able to watch my book as a movie if it was live action. So it'd be really cool if it was animated. And I really love this studio because I really like Castlevania. And then I would see people like say on social media, oh, it should be like Castlevania style. And that was when we had started like working on like rights and who we were going to work with. So just had to sit there and be like, you have no idea. So
that is insane. I mean, I was hoping for something like that for any of your works, really. And that just blew me away when I saw that.
I'm
Congrats.
so excited. I'm so excited.
So today's event was going to be for your newest release, which was Compound Fracture. It was such like a departure from your other novels, but still very much your style and
Perfect.
your writing.
That's what
And
I was going for. So
yes, it was so good. I don't, it's hard to figure out where to start, honestly. I guess my first question that I've had personally, and this may have just been like my own Mandela effect or something, or I misread something somewhere, but I swear I had originally seen that this was meant to be an adult release. When did I dream that or
I think you might have.
okay,
My
okay.
adult book comes out next year.
Ah, I got
So
it.
the only adult book that I've ever sold comes out next year.
Okay, okay,
This
okay,
one I think was always going to be a YA because I actually came
okay.
up with this one before I came up with what is now Hell Followed With Us.
Mm,
Um, I had like the characters that would eventually become Hell Followed With Us in like my senior year of high school. But it wasn't really Hell Followed With Us until the summer between my second and final year of undergrad. Because I did college in 3 years. So Hell Followed With Us didn't come to me until the summer between those years. Compound Fracture came to me freshman year of college. Almost Not almost as is, but the plot was generally the same. Um, I always knew it was going to be about a teenager. I always knew it was going to be about a boy trying to get vengeance for something that had been done to him. But I didn't really have the details. At that time, Miles was cis, weird, incorrect, bad. And he was neurotypical, again, weird, strange, incorrect, bad. Um, and honestly, I don't even think it took place in West Virginia. I don't remember where it took place. All I remember was that it was rural. But then again, at that time, I thought I was a neurotypical bisexual cis girl who didn't really want to talk about my family in West Virginia at that point. So things changed, obviously, and here we are. My adult book, funnily enough, is also about an autistic trans man in West Virginia. But it tackles some stuff that Compound Fracture does not touch on, mainly pregnancy as body horror, pregnancy as gendered violence, pregnancy as detransition, that sort of thing. It's really gross and a lot to stomach and so nasty. It has made my early readers physically ill. um, I had a sensitivity reader who actually couldn't read the ending because she was so grossed out by it. She said in her notes, I straight up skipped it. I'm sure it's fine. Um, but yeah, Compound Fracture was always very safely in YA. But if you're excited for my adult work, don't worry. Like you have stuff coming up.
I have a feeling that's why I in my brain thought that they were the same book, probably
Yeah, I
because
got
of
scrambled.
the setting as well. Not obviously not the same exact setting, but rural and
Honestly, it's really close.
yeah.
Because Compound Fracture is based on the county where my mamaw grew up. It's a very specific northern West Virginia county, and very specifically set in two small. They're called cities on a technicality. They are not. They are small towns. Um, in that area. My adult book also takes place in a fictionalization of the same county, just with different names. So they're both technically that county. I've just taken different places of each of them. So it is technically it is technically the same place.
I get you. Okay. Definitely makes sense with that. I guess that sort of leads into one of my questions as well, which was what sort of research did you do for this book? And you kind of already touched on that with the drawing inspiration from your you said your mama's and your own personal history. And I guess I was sort of curious of anything else you may have done, especially reading the parts about the Saint Abernathy, uh, sort of like I got a sense of um, like those movies you see where the kids are like they go to the library and they look at the old newspapers on the reels and such. I'm just envisioning of like sort of what sort of research you may have had to do to sort of breathe life into this book.
Oh yeah. So like one of the major things was that I actually, when I first started drafting, went down to my mammal's hometown and just like stayed for a few days there and walked around. The major thing that stuck out to me when I did that was that the town has changed a lot since I was there as a kid. Because we would go up about like once a year for a family reunion. Because it was always up in the mountains. You'd always have to cross Blackwater Falls to get there. And I remember it really vividly. And I especially remember a bunch of burned down buildings. That was always a thing. There were always like burned down or torn down buildings that were kind of overgrown with grass. And I remember it being super quiet and there wasn't a lot of things going on Main Street. And it was generally very, not a lot of people came through. And when I visited to look around, when I was like, okay, I'm actually going to write about this place, none of those buildings were there anymore. Main Street had art print shops and like a holiday store and a bunch of other things. And I remember having a conflicted reaction to this is not how I remembered it. And I don't remember the posters in the windows saying that apartments for rent. I don't remember the prices being that high. Um, because like, oh, it was like a $900 for a one bedroom apartment. I was like, that's high for this area. But at the same time, it was the first time I'd actually felt safe in the area as a queer person.
Mm.
Because there were like rainbow flags like in the windows of a bunch of them. And we were staying a little bit out of town because I wasn't staying with family. And it felt scary to like go across the street to the gas station to like get food. And so it was this very bizarre push and pull about how I felt about the area, where it's like, oh, this is like one of the first times I felt safe visiting as a queer person, but also this is not the place that I remembered, and I'm trying to write about the place that I remember. Um, so that was a really strange and weird experience, but thankfully I did manage to like pinpoint I was mainly going there for the geography of the area. So the things about there only being one stoplight is true. I know exactly where the one stoplight is. They actually just got a second and they're super pumped about it. I think it hit like the front page in the newspaper. They're getting a second stoplight in the county. Because there used to only be one. The offhanded remark about having to call like an ambulance from another state because there aren't any in the area. We found that out because one of my uncles got injured and they couldn't get an ambulance for like an hour or 2 hours or something like that. Just because there aren't any in the area. You have to call them down from Maryland. Um, I did end up reading a few books just to kind of like really sit and make sure that I understood all of the stereotypes about the area so that I could unpack them. One of my favorites was, oh, I hope I'm getting this correct. What You're Getting Wrong About Appalachia by Elizabeth Catt. I adore that book. It is absolutely amazing. And it's also where I got the information about West Virginia having some of the highest rates or the highest rate of trans kids in the US, like per capita, which was really like astounding to me, especially since I remember looking it up and the chances to get HRT in West Virginia are minuscule. Like there's so few places that you can find a place to do it. Um, I think the thing that stands out to me, there were two things that stood out to me the most while I was doing research. One of them was I was attempting to figure out what prison Miles's great grandmother would have gone to after killing a member of law enforcement, and I couldn't track it down. So I ended up emailing a historian at West Virginia University being like, "Hey, I noticed that you do a lot of work in like women's history in the area. Do you know what prison a female murderer would have gone to in the 1950s if it was committed here?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, it would have been Penn Springs. Here you go." And not only that, but she sent me a link to like a West Virginia e-encyclopedia that has so much cool information. So I would spend so long like digging through it and finding cool stuff, and it's all just up there. And it's an old website. It reminded me of like the GeoCities era. It is definitely old. But it was so cool to just go through that and dig through that and learn more about the area. And then the second one was I made up the Twist Crit Calamity. Um, Especially because most of the events of the Coal Wars of West Virginia happened down south. It happened in the south of West Virginia. But my family's from the north, and I didn't want to stray too far from what I knew in order to write this. So I was like, you know what? I will make up a failed miner strike in the north of West Virginia. Whatever. Um, but as I was looking for places for photos, so if you have like a first edition printing of Compound Fracture, the end papers have a bunch of photos from the Library of Congress from around that time. It's so cool. It's absolutely amazing. Like I'm super hyped about it. And I was trying to like find places for my design team where they could get these pictures. And I found a website that compiled the history of the county that my mama is from. I was like, oh, wait a second. And it turns out there was, in fact, a failed miner strike in the area. It never got off the ground. I don't think it lasted more than a day. But I hadn't heard of it. And yeah, it turns out apparently they attempted a miner strike. It didn't go anywhere. It failed. But I thought I was making it up, and it turns out I had accidentally like parroted history, which was honestly like really cool.
I'm thinking like what's the retroactive version of the Apollo Gift of Prophecy meme?
Right.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I do remember seeing that, I believe, on your social medias when you were during the research portion about that, see finding the real failed strike. That's amazing.
It was
The
so cool. I'm
world
so
is
bummed we couldn't get the photos. My mama, I don't think knew, like the person who took the photos had passed and the rights had gone to family, but I don't think my mama knew like whoever had the rights because I was straight up about to be like, "Hey, can you like call one of your sisters in the area and see if we can figure out who this is?" But it didn't pan out.
Uh, yeah, but that it's just the world is just made of crazy coincidences. That's amazing.
Really.
I wanted to backtrack just a little bit when you were talking about revisiting the town and seeing the changes that had happened, the differences in rent price and such. I kind of definitely like felt that as well in the book, and it's sort of like, and I've experienced this in my own life as well. Like a juxtaposition of, you know, safeness and class difference and what that means in this life in as a queer person. Um, and like there's a very in like rural spaces, you know, it's very more conservative and it's all just sort of meshed together. And that's not saying they're all like that, as of course, as we see with in Compound Fracture with you'll have to forgive me. It's been a hot second since I finished reading it. But um, with the rebellion and such, and sorry, lost my train of thought a little bit. Um, but anyway, it's just that juxtaposition between those two things, and I definitely feel that Miles struggles with that as well. Part of how I worded that when I was writing down talking points was also justice versus vengeance, and sort of like how that is also like a dichotomy. But yeah.
Yeah, the book deals a lot with political violence and the difference between like justice and vengeance. And one of the things I think I like a lot about the book is that I never give a clear answer on like what counts as what's okay, what's not. Um, I let the characters do what they do, and I'm really, really excited to see reader reactions to did they go too far? Did they not go far enough? Was what they did justified? Um, like, does it count as revenge or does it count as making things right? Who knows? Who knows? I don't have the answers. Miles certainly doesn't know. He is 16. He is a child. He has no idea. Um, especially when the idea of vengeance and justice get mixed up with survival. Because once you add survival into the mix, oh, everything's out the window. So does it count as justice if it's self-defense? You know, it's so much. There's so much in the story that the characters don't have an answer to. I don't even know if they're fully aware that their situation is asking that question. Um, I feel like if you like sure, if you go up to a character like Dallas and you ask that question, I'm sure they would be happy to sit and debate with you over the specifics for hours over dinner. Like they would be delighted to talk like theory and to really get into it. But if you take the main character and his family and you sit them down and ask them, like, was it justice? Was it revenge? Was it justified? They'll go, I don't care. All that matters is that we're still breathing. Um, and that is also kind of a dichotomy that I wanted to play with, where it's like, does any of that matter in the face of survival? And what matters in the face of survival? Especially because survival as it stands is not something that I feel like gets discussed a whole lot when we're talking about like political issues. Like it's a part of it's a part of political discussions that nobody wants to admit is there. Um, because like you can spend as much time as you want talking about like theory and policy or whatever, but the underlying thing is that like, hey, some people are going to die. And how are you going to square that with, who you're voting for or like what fancy discussions you're having at a voter block party or whatever. It's the main characters don't care. The main characters don't care what you think of what they did. All they care is that they're alive, but it's the reader's job to sit and actually think through these questions. Um, it was honestly really fun writing in that way because I know my first two books, I spent a lot of time thinking about like, oh, like what am I implying with this? What am I saying with this? Yada yada. And in this one, I just went, this is what the characters are going to do to make it. And however people interpret that, I don't even know how to interpret it, so I'm eager to see how other people do.
That makes like a lot of sense, actually. I definitely felt that like difference in this one versus Hellfall with Us, the Spirit Bears its teeth. As not that it was, all over the place at all, not farthest from that, but more that it was open to reader interpretation, which now that you said that, I realize like, oh, I am sort of projecting onto these characters, onto this scenario, this story, especially with like the instances where Miles versus, and without spoiling too much, the self-defense versus um, attack or going after someone, offensive. That's the word, offensive versus
Yeah, there you
defensive.
go.
And his the choices that he makes in the situations that he's placed in. Then I, as the reader, look at it and go, "Oh, justice versus vengeance." Him learning the difference between that, but also he's as a character in that world, he's not, thinking that black and white verbatim. So that's a really fascinating way to look at it and to write that. That's really cool.
And honestly, I had a lot of fun with approaching things that way, and I'm noticing that a lot more of my work is sort of veering towards that. Where like my earlier work was definitely like this is the exact thing that I'm trying to portray. And a lot of my upcoming work is not all of it. There's I think my 27 book is very much like I'm trying to say a specific thing. But some of my other works are like before then is just kind of like here's what the characters are doing. Like this is what would simply happen in a terrible situation like this. It is up to you to interpret it.
Yeah, that's that's definitely a way to put it for that. I'm just envisioning like me on the outside watching, Miles on his journey as he's, tripping in his way through survival in his world. um, I was just looking here. Let me just make sure we don't have any questions here. If I can find my right tab. Oh, there we go. We do have someone here. Let's see. Atomic Baz. This was one of the things I like so much about these books, allowing queer characters to be unlikable sometimes, making choices that are questionable. Yeah, exactly. Um, I think we've definitely reached a point in queer media over, many different mediums, books, movies, etc., where I feel like we don't have to sanitize ourselves as much.
Yes.
Um, and especially, of course, horror goes hand in hand with that. And the exploration of those two things is, you'd think it'd be a negative, but really it's humanizing, I think,
Mhm.
more than anything. So
If you're excited for like unlikable like queer main characters, my entire upcoming bibliography is going to be so in your wheelhouse. The main characters of my next three books are I'm genuinely like sitting here like as I'm writing it, like how can I make them worse? Right? The main character of my adult book, You Weren't Meant to Be Human, I just describe him as just like gross and pathetic. Like I love him dearly. He's a fascinating guy and like he doesn't deserve a lot of what happened to him, but like some of it is kind of his fault. And like some of it is just because like he's kind of a coward and he relinquishes agency because he doesn't want to be at fault for anything. So he like destroys his own sense of agency so that he doesn't have to make choices. And it's just a bizarre human being. The main character of my YA book in 26, You're No Better, is awful. He is manipulative. He is a terrible friend. And the main character of Beast Order in my 27 book, look, he's a disabled character, right? He's autistic. He is also super ableist. And I'm really excited with that book, especially to get into lateral ableism, which is, where a disabled person holds ableist attitudes towards other disabled people. He's a fascinating character, and I can't wait to dig into him. So all of my upcoming characters, they just get worse. They just get so worse. So I hope you're ready.
I mean, honestly, I am excited for that. I think there's like a lot to be said about um, portraying negative main characters. Well, not negative, but complicated main characters um, in a way that like sort of reflects back on society, sort of. Because like I'm thinking of like um, rather than it can show that in the reader themselves on like larger or smaller levels, and they're like, hey, I don't like that person, oh, I do that.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
it's the dialogue that you create with the reader with that is it's very powerful, and that I'm very excited to see that.
Oh yeah. I know that the main characters of this game aren't queer, but like unlikable or main characters that do very wrong things or might even be classified as antagonists, I highly recommend Mouthwashing. Um, you can like play a walkthrough of it if you're bad at video games, but it's like a 2 hour like I wouldn't call it a walking simulator, but it's a very interactive movie and it's fascinating. It's so upsetting. It's so gross. And the person that you spend a lot of time in the head in, all of the characters, not all, most of the characters are not great. All of them make massive mistakes. Some of them are not great. Some of them are monsters. And it's awesome. Oh, it's so good.
Oh wow, thank you, I'll definitely look into that. I feel like
Yeah,
I've heard.
mouthwashing, as in the hygiene product. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like that name does sound vaguely familiar. I might have heard it down the grapevine then, but yeah.
My wife's
Uh,
dinner is ready. I hope she's home.
oh, oh dear.
It is in the oven. Let me text her.
Well, that
All right.
happens. Let's see here. What have we got? A couple other things on our comments here. Um, if I can get my computer to behave. There we go. Let's see, from Justin B. How do you capture that sense of hope while writing horror and queer stories in the current climate?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I get this question a lot actually, because people started pointing that out in my work in Hell Followed With Us. And it's kind of been something that I've like brought along with me, like for all of the work that I do. I think there are even bits and pieces of it in my adult work, which as a whole is far more cynical and genuinely a little more hopeless, than my YA work. And the reason that I do that, actually, if you don't mind, there is actually a massive accident, where my wife is driving home from work, and I need to turn the oven off real quick so her food
Oh,
doesn't burn. So
okay.
literally 30 seconds.
No
Thank you,
worries.
I appreciate it.
Um,
Ah, okay, I'm back. Okay. Um, Hope. Right, we were talking about hope. Wow, my hair. Okay, give me a hot second to look normal. All right. Um, I end up putting moments of hope in my work, not even as it has the unintended side effect of like showing of like giving readers a moment to like reflect on the importance of queer joy and queer connection in life, in art, that sort of thing. The main reason that it ends up in my work in the first place is a book kind of sucks if it's just one bad thing after another with no respite, right? So as I'm putting a book together, I create these massive 10-page long single space chapter by chapter synopses. And as I'm writing it, I'm very careful to put in moments where the awful things can slow down. The characters can look at each other, they can look back at what's happened, and they can sit and just be like, wow, that sucked. It really gives the reader to slow down and look at the characters and look at what they've been through and give them a chance to recombobulate, I guess, before going on to the next set of awful things. Um, Originally, I ended up including it in my work simply as a pacing thing, just something that I wanted to, I wanted to make sure that the book balanced okay, that the pacing was all right, that the vibes went, in the direction they should go. But it had the rather unintended side effect of being a really cool way to highlight the importance of queer community and the importance of rest and the importance of connection. So it's kind of doing double duty. I'm always looking at something through a thematic perspective, but also a craft narrative structural thing. I like I like things in my books to like be pulling double duty, so to speak. It's like, ah, yes, this pushes along the plot in this way, but it also pushes along like the themes and what I'm trying to say and that sort of thing. One might come before the other, but they do eventually do both. And also it's just so nice to like really sit and calm down and like let the characters talk. Because like I have two favorite scenes in The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. One of them is the horrific chapter-long C-section, and one of them is the main character just sitting and talking with someone, right? There's so much that we can do in those quiet moments, as writers and as creators. So like I just really love playing with the dichotomy of like when things are like really quiet and also when things suck so bad.
Yeah, definitely. um, Having those highs and lows over a work definitely like gives it such a cool pacing, sort of like a thriller roller coaster.
Yes.
But not that I'd say that Compound Fracture is like, totally like 100% a thriller, but it
Yeah.
definitely has those moments that give it that page turning, what's going to happen next.
Like the last third is just one thing after another. Because the first third of the book, I will admit, is a lot of time spent getting to know the area, getting to know the people, getting to know the relationships of everyone in town, so that when we hit the back third, it just goes off like a gunshot and we don't have to slow down.
Yeah, I definitely felt that was but it definitely wasn't. I've read other things that try to do that and it ends up jarring. This was not. It definitely
Perfect.
still felt. Yeah, I was like it was still very 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 smooth pacing for in my opinion. Let me. Thought I saw another comment. Yes. Um, from Leah. Can you tell us more about your creative process, how your stories grow into books?
Oh, yes. I love talking about my process because I've never heard of another author that has a process quite like mine. I come up with more story concepts than I can ever use. I come up with, if not one a day, then something close to it, right? And frankly, that is untenable. That is completely impossible to keep up with. And if you come up with that many ideas, A lot of them are gonna suck. A lot of them are gonna be contrite. They're gonna be derivative, right? Like, not everything can be the next New York Times bestseller. It doesn't work like that. But my mind is overactive and I come up with things constantly, and it's really frustrating. So every time I come up with something, a lot of times I come up with concepts or characters or vibes more than I come up with solid, concrete stories. So what I do is I don't write them down, because if I write them down, they become too concrete, they become too set, I become too locked in on the way things are. Okay, good. My wife's home. Her food's gonna be okay. Um, I become too like fixated on what I wrote down is the way that it has to be. So what I do is I take the idea, I roll it over a little bit, and then I toss it into the back of my head. I toss it into the pit with all of the other thousands of ideas that I've had over the course of my life. And I specifically want to misremember, combine, and sort of like mix up the ideas that I've had. Um, Misremember is the huge thing, which is why I refuse to write them down. And I let them sort of combine and reconfigure, and I'll come up with lots of ideas that are derivative of the ones that I've had. So it feels kind of like pulling an idea out, putting a few new things on it, or kind of reshaping it, and then throwing it back in, and doing that over and over again. I feel like an apt metaphor would be a cow chewing its cud, but that's gross. Oh,
When does that ever stop you?
and it has never stopped me. My wife is here with the cat.
Has the baby
Ah.
Yes, the baby has been fed. This is Pop Rock. She's a demon who hates me.
perfect?
Ow, ow, ow. Okay.
I just wanted to make sure the baby'd been fed.
Yep, she's been fed.
But she was
Thank you.
looking at me with sad eyes.
She's lying. Um,
Surprised
like a cow chewing its cud. I'm picking up an idea, reworking it, and then throwing it back over and over. Um, and eventually I will have combined so many different ideas into one thing that it creates this sort of like multi-layered, complex thing that I've had by the time that I pick something up to work on it for at least a year. I do that with a lot of my characters too. I have lots of characters that I realize that are kind of similar, but once I have them in the back of my head for a long time, I realize that they're all facets of the same person that I just need to figure out how to combine. So like eventually once I've had a concept for a year, I'll pull it out and it will be relatively fully formed and ready to go. I just have to figure out what it's trying to do. For my adult book, that's coming out next year, I had a bunch of ideas that were kind of similar, kind of dancing around it. I had an idea that, that was interesting. And this part of this was really cool. And eventually they all kind of got sewn together into this one thing. Um, Once I pull an idea out and it's in a decent shape and I can use it, usually what I do at that point is the first thing that I do is I write like the one sentence pitch. The thing that I like to do is I like to go onto Publishers Weekly or Publishers Marketplace and look at the rights report and create a fake rights report. Like create a fake deal memo to be like, oh, this is what's going to be reported when I sell this book in a year or so. It gives me something to look forward to. And then I try to write, when you pick up a book and there's that 2 paragraph description of what the book is about, I try to write that. I try to write how this book would be sold to a consumer. And then, depending on the kind of book that I'm writing, I might write a thesis statement where I'm like, oh, okay, these are the themes that I'm trying to tackle in this book. These are the metaphors I'm going to be using to do that. Here's what I'm trying to say to my readers. Am I trying to get a point across? Like if I'm writing a YA book, I'll want to sit and be like, okay, what am I telling these kids? What point am I trying to get across? What wisdom am I imparting? If I'm writing an adult book, I'm just like, what am I screaming about or what do I think is hot? Right? Just why I'm writing this book. And then I will sit down and write the 10-page single space chapter by chapter synopsis that actually tells me what's going on in the book. And then eventually I will flag down my agent to be like, hey, is this any good? And hand it over. So by the time a book gets on the shelf, I will usually have had parts of it for 3 years or so.
Um, yeah, that's it's really interesting to hear your writing process. I've over the few years that I've been doing events, I hear all sorts of different writing processes from all kinds of people, and it never ceases to shock me that each person answers differently.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to do it, and admittedly, it changes every time you write a book a little bit.
Mhm.
It changes a little bit because The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. I came up with, I think, like 2 months before I sold it because I had to come up with something quick, which is why it was so difficult to write. Writing that thing was a nightmare. It was so difficult. Editing it was so hard because I'd only had it for maybe a few months at that point. But Hell Followed With Us, Compound Fracture, and a lot of my upcoming works I've had for a very long time. So hopefully these books should be kinder. We'll see.
Let's see. Don't think. Let's see what other questions we've got here. Um, ooh, have you thought about doing any short stories or short story collections with any rejected concepts? Ooh, that's an interesting one.
I do have so I do have some short stories that I have out. Um there is Choke Chain, which is available on Medium. Oh my gosh, I wrote that when I was an undergrad. I can't believe people still like it. I would love to do like a rewrite of it because oh my gosh, that was 6 years ago. I have changed so much. I have a short story in oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the extremely high profile sci-fi mag. It's on my website. And I have a short story in an anthology coming up. And I have a few others that I'm working on for other things. Um, Short stories are admittedly kind of difficult for me because I don't think in short story length chunks. I think in novel shaped chunks. Um, and most of the time, when an idea gets rejected, it gets thrown right back into the pit, right? It gets thrown back into the pit to be cannibalized and torn apart and reconstituted into other things. I have a friend who is desperately trying to convince me to write a collection of short stories that take place after the events of my YA books when the main characters are adults. I think it would be really fun. It would never sell, but it would look great as another entry on my website. I'm very aware. Um, so like usually when an idea gets rejected or I end up not being able to use it, it gets kind of thrown right back into the pit. But as a side note, I'm also relatively lucky enough that like I haven't really had any rejected ideas. I've never had a book die on sub or anything along those lines. I have some books that I shelved back when I was an undergrad or a teenager, and I'm constantly like ripping pieces off of those because I was coming up with some cool stuff when I was a kid. But most of the time, if something doesn't work out, you can find threads or like shards of it in stuff I work on moving forward. Um, I'm also at a part I'm at a place in my career where I'm selling things on proposal. So like I'm selling things based on the synopsis and like the pitches that I write. So I don't usually have a lot of material to lose if something doesn't get picked up, which admittedly is nice. It saves me a lot of time and makes sure that I don't waste too much on something that might not sell. I do really appreciate getting being able to do that. Apparently that's relatively rare. But I'm just so lucky it works out because the idea of having to commit to an idea before I know it's going to sell is terrifying.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. As someone who could only aspire to ever finish any kind of writing, I can only imagine what a nightmare it would be to commit to any particular idea.
I think Hell
Uh,
Followed With Us is the only book that I wrote in full before it sold. Everything
wow.
else sold on auction, and my adult book sold on 90 pages and a synopsis. Um, the editor was like, I love the concept. I need you to completely change it. And then I rewrote a new synopsis and turned it in without any extra pages, and he went sold, so it sold on like 10 pages.
Wow, it's incredible.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it.
It's deserved though, for sure. Um, Ooh, here's another one here. From Riley. Do you have a favorite one of your own characters? How did you make this character and why do you like them?
Oh my gosh. I genuinely think that my favorite character right now is the protagonist of my adult book.
Hmm.
His name is Crane. He is a 22-year-old autistic trans man who currently lives in West Virginia. He doesn't speak. He can. He says about 5 to 10 words over the course of the book. He just doesn't talk because he hates you. Um, and in fact, he refuses most other modes of communication. Like, okay, yeah, if most of the times, if if you don't want to talk, you can write, you can text people, you can use like augmentative and alternative communication. For the most part, no. He shoots down all of those forms of communication because it's not that he doesn't want to talk, he doesn't want to communicate with other human beings. He simply doesn't want to. Under very limited circumstances, he will interact with like use those forms of communication. But most of the time, over the course of the book, people interact with him the way that C3PO talks to R2D2. Like R2D2 makes a bunch of beeps and boops, and then everyone seems to understand what he means. That is how the characters in this book treat the main character. Like they're having a conversation, the person's yapping, the main character will like give a look, and there will be some like bits in narration about how he feels about the situation, and it's like the other person like gets it. But the people around him have been interacting with him for so long that they just kind of work with it. They know what he means. And he's a really fascinating character because he is taken from a lot of my like worst impulses, a lot of what I look like when my autism is really acting up, so to speak. He is extremely messy. He is essentially, the concept of like a bad ending in a video game. He
Yeah.
he is my bad ending. Um, like my bad ending is the start of his story.
Hmm.
He is taken from a lot of like really bad thought processes I had as a teenager. And I'm like, what would I be like if I had never grown out of that? He is deeply self-destructive. He resents his own sense of agency and actively tries to destroy it so that he is at the mercy of other people because that's where he prefers to be. And he is a very strange, very unhinged creature. And I love him dearly. He is so much fun because every time that I'm writing him, I'm just like, what would be the grossest or weirdest thing that this human being could do right now? And then he just does that. It, there are some scenes in the book where I'm like, I don't even know if I should like talk about it. Um, because at one point he has like a particular dead thing you'll find out in the story, and he's like, if I just open up this dead thing, right, then I feel like it would solve a lot of my problems. And like one of the characters looks at him and goes, no. Like the way that you talk to a dog when it's got like a rabbit in its mouth. You're like,
Mhm.
no, drop it. What are you doing? So characters have a tendency to react to him that way, where it's just like, dude, what is wrong with you? He's so fascinating. And he talks about a lot of parts of the trans and autistic experience that I feel like people don't want to like think about, right? Because he's a very messy sort of admittedly kind of gross person. And there are some parts of those experiences that are messy and kind of gross, and people don't want to think about it and people don't want to talk about it. And I'm just like, yeah, no, I'll go for it. Let's have fun. Let's tango. Let's do it. And then on top of that, it really gets into like pregnancy and like how certain trans men think of pregnancy, especially if they have tocophobia, like I do, which is a fear of pregnancy. Yeah, essentially the main character realizes that he's pregnant at the start of the book and then loses his mind for several months. Um, and it's just so fun to like take the brakes off and just go for it. Oh my gosh. It's so freeing. Like I'm having a great time with this guy. And also he's just like he's kind of cool. Like he's kind of cool in a way because he has all these tattoos and piercings and that I really want to get, but haven't had the time to get around to it. Um, so he's like my bad ending, but also I'm kind of jealous of him. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
I'm definitely in a better relationship than he is, let me tell you.
But yeah, that just brings me back to, the characters that we love to hate or hate to love, in uh, sort of like these well, not really symbols, but manifestations of um, characteristics we usually shy away from, and fiction that really delves into that is some of my favorite, and I'm so fascinated and so thrilled to see how this plays out. Like, I can't wait for that
Yes.
one.
Bring back pathetic protagonists. They're so much fun.
Yeah. All right. Let me see if we have any more good comments scattered in here before I ask a couple final things. Um, um, Ooh, here's this one's ties into what we were just talking about. Um, it was a follow-up from the earlier question about capturing the sense of hope while writing horror and queer stories in the current climate. Following up, is this going to be just a product of your YA work? And but I'm very excited to see how it will be present in You Weren't Meant to Be Human. So yeah, um,
Yeah. You
to
weren't
give
meant to
some.
be human. I think the hope and the lightness exists in two separate characters.
Hmm.
And in a lot of I feel like in a lot of work, if we're looking at a horror novel, especially in queer spaces, the hope and the light comes from a love interest. And the You Weren't Meant to Be Human does have that, but it also has another point of hope that is definitely not that. The main character is in a bizarre polycule. Two people aren't even aware that they're in one. So I don't know how this main character manages to be cheating on so many people at once. It's a nightmare. But he is also in a relationship with a married couple, who are who have had their own terrible existences, but have sort of fought their way out of that and are now kind of like a stable middle class couple. And they look at the main character and see someone that they are attempting to save. And the main character is like, it's flattering for someone to want to save you, but ultimately it's useless. Um, but that's kind of his own self-deprecation in there. It will inevitably eventually not be useless. But we also have the main character's mother figure, who is a 60-year-old Appalachian woman, who is tired of everybody in this story, but is the person who, she's had a baby before, so like she knows how to help the main character through like false contractions and stuff like that. And then we actually get to see like the main character's parents and what life could have been if he was brave enough to tell them what was wrong, and offer a chance at maybe things getting better. So You Are Meant to Be Human is deeply more cynical. There are a lot fewer instances of hope, but I think it makes what hope is there shine a little brighter. We'll see how much of that stays through edits. I get my edit notes back really soon, so we'll see.
Well, regardless, I am very excited to see that. Maybe after the fact, you can do like a pull an Oscar Wilde, do like an uncut version. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, let's see. I think that covers the questions that I saw. For my final questions, um, it's less of a question, more, well, I suppose it is a question. One of my talking points was I think everyone that read Compound Fracture has to think about the railroad spike incident. Um, it's a very jarring mental image, and really stuck with me, especially like as that follows through the book. Without spoiling that, if you've read it, you understand. Um, but I guess my question is, where is that something you came up on your own? Was that based on something you saw in research or?
I ended up, I think I'm pretty sure I came up with it on my own. If there is something that I've read where maybe I took inspiration from it, maybe that was the case, but I
Okay.
don't like actively remember taking it from anywhere. I simply wanted to come up with something that was very primal and brutal. I didn't want like a stereotypical like execution method.
Mm,
I especially because it was more of a vigilante thing that was going on, even though it was law enforcement. It
mm,
was an extrajudicial killing. So I simply wanted it to be deeply upsetting and deeply raw and something that would kind of have a really solid through line. And I think over the course of the book, it became like relatively iconic because there are a
mm.
lot of alternate covers where the railroad spike is featured very heavily. People bring up the railroad spike all the time, and it even got to the point. Let me grab it off the bookcase.
Oh yes, I was hoping.
My dad actually ordered a railroad spike for me as a present when the book released.
Incredible.
So this is terrifying.
Yeah,
That is not great. So it went like that. Um,
yeah.
so
That,
that sucks. That's terrifying. Yeah, it's huge.
right.
Um,
I
but
guess
yeah, my dad actually ordered this for me.
that's amazing. Yeah, I had to ask because it's definitely become
I
iconic
was
of
also
that
given this,
book.
but we couldn't fit this into the story.
Oh,
It's a knife that is made out of an antler. It's very cool.
for the next
We
one.
could not make this work.
Incredible.
There.
Well, bravo for it being like an original idea because it crosses the line of like unbelievable to the point of believable. Like it can't be something you make up because that's so specific and so like brutal and like you
Yeah,
said. So that's why I was like, is this based on real life? Because it sure is. It's wild, but it sounds like something that would have happened as well. So
exactly. Like
yeah.
it's that part of I think the thing that kind of inspired it, oh my gosh, there's a poem, oh I cannot remember who it's by. But I memorized it in high school. And I want to get a tattoo of it eventually, where it'll be a tattoo of an iron nail with the line "How not be destroyed by it." And it is talking about how this guy like read a read a report of how a famous dictator would execute political prisoners by hammering nails into their skulls. And he's like, that is terrible enough that the fact that it exists, like it shouldn't exist as something that actually happened. It needs to exist as a metaphor for brutality. And the fact that it exists as something real at all is horrifying. And I feel like I kind of like pulled some inspiration from that from there. That poem was pivotal for me as a teenager.
Damn. Let's see here. I believe we're getting towards the end of time here. Um, let's see. Yeah, no more questions. Someone pointed out your preacher poster behind you.
Yes. Not only did I watch the show, I own all of the comics.
Amazing. Yeah, I need to watch that and read it. I've heard
It was
amazing
so
things.
fun. It was so fun.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining me again. I really appreciated this. And for those of you watching, both now and in the future, while we still have them, we will have signed copies of Compound Fracture. I believe they're still the first printing that we have. So those cool
Yeah,
photos
we
that we
we got a
made
lot of
about.
the first printing, so I think we're gonna have the first printing for a while.
Yes, but it should have those amazing photographs from the Library of Congress on the inside. And you can find that both at in store to, at the Book Loft. We're down in Durban Village. And you can also go to bookloft.com and order it that way. If you wanted a signed copy, just put it in your order comments and I'll make sure you get it. Thank you again so much for this. And thanks for dealing with some of the technical snafus in the beginning there.
You're fine.
But I had such a great time today. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Oh, this was great. Thank you so much for having me. I
Of
really appreciate
course.
it.
Yeah, I am definitely looking forward to your next works coming out next year. But yeah, you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Bye, y'all.
Goodbye.